All right, welcome everybody. My name is Pete LePage, and today joining me we have Brad Frost, who's going to be talking to us about some rather cool stuff. Brad, I'll leave it to you to introduce yourself. This is a reschedule of an event that we had a little while ago, so welcome, and I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. So yeah, my name is Brad Frost, and I am a mobile web strategist and front-end designer at an agency, RGA, which is based in New York, but I am broadcasting to you from beautiful Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So I've been spending a lot of time talking about responsive design versus separate mobile design for the last couple years and stuff. So yeah, so that'll do it. So in case you have been living under a rock, you probably realize that we had an election not that long ago. So that's what we're going to talk about, is we're going to talk about the presidential candidates' mobile web strategy. So this is the responsive design versus separate mobile site presidential smackdown edition. So let's get started. This is a dead horse, and this is a picture of me beating that dead horse. A lot has been talked about regarding responsive design versus making a separate mobile website, which route to go, which one to choose. There's been a lot of great articles like this one, this one, Google weighing in a little bit, Facebook developers blog. So a lot of people have a lot of different opinions on which way to go, what's best for your organization as far as what mobile web strategy you want to choose. But really the ultimate answer is that it depends, right? It really depends on the way your company is structured, what your budget is, what sort of team you have in place, what sort of technologies you're working in, you're proficient in, and all of that good stuff. So really it's not a black and white answer. So if you're expecting one, sorry about that. So why are we bothering talking about this, right? Why am I tearing apart the presidential candidates' websites and making them look so bad? Really because I'm a terrible human being, but actually, no, that's not true. I'm trying to be constructive here. But what it really comes down to is that very rarely do we have an apples to apples comparison of when to use a certain strategy. There's a lot of factors at play, right? Time is a big one. So even if you were to have a separate mobile site and then redo it into a responsive website, you're in a different time. The web landscape, the device landscape has shifted, people's behavior has shifted, more people are getting online. So could you really chalk any success or failure up to a specific technique? Maybe, maybe not. Again, it all depends. So very rarely do we have something that's actually a very black and white comparison between two different strategies. But that's exactly what we have for this presidential election, right? You have two candidates trying to accomplish the exact same thing, using the exact same mediums, only they've decided to go different routes. So that's why this is sort of such an attractive case study, because really all the other variables are control variables, right? You're going after the same audience, you're going after the same goals. There's no difference in what they're trying to accomplish. So let's take a look at the candidates' websites. This is Barack Obama's website, and this is Mitt Romney's website. And for the keen observers out there, you'll probably notice something. Splash screens are back in full effect. Why they went that way is beyond me, but yeah, so splash screens. Apparently splash screens are still relevant in 2012 or something. So, this one's my favorite. Are you in the website? No, I am not. Please let me in. Yeah, so once you get beyond these little terrible splash screens, you look at something that resembles something like a website. So this is Barack Obama's website, and this is Mitt Romney's website. Sort of similar feel, right, to both of them. So makes for a good comparison. So again, these are the desktop versions of the site. So we have to ask ourselves an important question. Why bother with the mobile web? Why are these candidates spending any time optimizing their websites for mobile devices? Well, we have sort of some naysayers, right? We have, oh, here we go again with the separate mobile versus responsive design debate. I predict in the future people will get sick and tired of using their mobile device as the primary means of using the internet and go back to using a nice 27-inch flat screen monitor where they could see everything, interact with everything, and actually type on a real keyboard versus all this touchscreen nonsense. We are cultivating a nation of slide-swiping, screen-surfing zombies. Well, Ken, despite your best attempts at sounding like a huge jerk, this is pretty awesome. That line is pretty amazing. We are cultivating a nation of slide-swiping, screen-surfing zombies. That's just great. But that's exactly, I mean, that's what's happening, right? We have a population that is increasingly mobile. If you look at the United States population, it's sitting somewhere around 311 million people. 55% of US adults access the web through a mobile device, and that number is growing. It seems, every single month the number gets bigger. In addition, a full 31% of mobile web capable smartphone users access the web primarily through a mobile device. That is how they primarily get online. Either it's the only way they get online, or absolutely the primary way that they're accessing the web. That's a pretty huge deal. And what that translates to in the eyes of the candidates, of the presidential candidates, is votes, right? You have this whole population that's mobile first or mobile only, and really getting in touch with them through the mobile web is one of the best ways to get in touch with them. If they have a desktop only website, they might be missing out on a huge chunk of the population. So we have all these different things that are driving to the mobile web, right? We have SMS smart links. We have my favorite thing in the world, QR codes, which open the browser, which open web pages. You have email marketing, which the candidates made ample use of, right? And email usage on mobile devices is skyrocketing. A lot of people use their mobile device to check their email. That's one of the most common tasks, right? And again, you receive a campaign email, you click a link, it opens the browser. You have all these different social media channels, right? Twitter, Facebook, Google+, all that good stuff, all driving to the web, right? You share pictures, you share text status updates, but you also share links, right? And those links open the web. You have search engine traffic and direct traffic and referral traffic, and all of these things are driving to the web on mobile devices. So it matters more and more to care about this. So if we take a look at what the candidates did with their respective sites, this is Barack Obama's site and on a small screen, and this is Mitt Romney's mobile site, or mittromney.com. Right? So Mitt Romney has basically gone and made a separate mobile site that exists at an M.dot location, while Barack Obama's is all sitting under one roof in a responsive design. So we have to ask another important question. Why would anybody visit a candidate's website? Right? And that's a really important question to ask. So I've broken it down into two different sort of categories of users. We have more information-based users, and we have more action-based users. So information people are looking for, the candidates' biographies, where they stand on issues, upcoming events in the local area, pertinent to the person viewing, myth busting, things like, Obama wants me to marry a penguin. No, they doesn't. So he gets to write back on his own website, and bust some myths of things floating out there in the media. And then also just, general news updates, who the candidates chose as their vice president picks and all that good stuff. On the action side of things, we have things like donations, which is a huge driver, right? And the candidates make sure not to leave that button out, the donate button. Volunteer for events, right? You could sign up for local events, participate in your community on behalf of the candidate, and spread the word via social networks and all of that stuff. And then, of course, buy some swag from their official shops there. So those are the sort of whys, right? You know, why are the candidates caring about this? Why do users care about this? Why are we even bothering with this in the first place? So we need some criteria in which to analyze and compare these sites. And Christopher Leon is a mobile web strategist based out of Minnesota. And he came up with a really clever way of looking at the basic needs of a mobile web user, or just a web user, really. And it's based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We as human beings have certain needs, and some of those needs are more important than others, right? Some are prerequisites for achieving the next level of self. So at the bottom of the heap, we have our physiological needs, right? We need to be able to breathe. We need to be able to eat and drink and sleep and all of that stuff. So that's really important. But then as you climb the pyramid a little bit, you know, we have, you know, a sense of safety, a sense of love, a sense of self-actualization and all of that stuff. So those are sort of considered nice to haves whenever you put them side by side to something like breathing. Right, so what Christopher did was something very clever, and he basically translated those into the needs of a web user. So basically, he broke it down into our ability to see, to see and navigate, to be able to read, to be able to respond and share. Performances in there, and then he's using the term HTML5 as sort of as a way of talking about enhancing a web experience to take advantage of some of the newer HTML5 capabilities. So what I've done is I've gone ahead, and I really like that idea, and I took it and sort of just simplified it a little bit and broke it down into these four areas, right? We first need to be able to access something. We then need to be able to interact with it. It needs to be highly performant, and we need to take advantage of all the various enhancements. So let's start with access, as it is the most important part of the pyramid. So these are devices. And even though I'm coming to you over the interwebs and I can't hear you, I think I still heard an audible sigh, right? This is the environment we are living with, right? This is the device landscape. And it's a pretty humbling sight. And this is really only just a small smattering of the devices that are out there. Luke Grabluski just posted an article recently that said something like 33 major devices were released in the last 2 months. You know, and so it's just becoming this staggering, you know, pace of change. And we as web developers, as web designers, we need to you know, pay attention to all of that. We need to know how to deal with it because it's becoming unruly pretty damn quick. So it's important to understand that the power of the web is its ubiquity, right? If you look back at this image, no native platform, no iOS app, no Android app, no Windows Phone app, no, you know, any native or proprietary solution can reach all of these devices, but the web can. And that's, you know, anytime you find yourself in a native versus web debate, just show them a picture like this and just say, oh, I'm sorry, can your solution, you know, reach all of these devices? I'm not saying that native apps are worthless, you know, quite the contrary, but at the same time, the web's level of reach is by and large the web's superpower. And because of that, we need to preserve and embrace that fact. We can't, you know, continue arbitrarily locking people out just because we don't like what configuration they have.
Oh, folks, it looks like we may have lost Brad for a sec. Let's see if we can get him back. Hang on one sec. All right. Well, always kind of fun dealing with technology. Brad's sitting in Pittsburgh right now, and I'm sitting here in New York. But it looks like we've lost him. So let's give him a second to join back in and see if we can get him back on. All right. Well, let's see. So, hey, no problem. I'll get you back. 1 sec. Hang on.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay. You're coming back up in 1 sec.
That's pretty odd.
Yeah.
I can't hear you, Pete. Okay. My other computer seemed to have frozen, so I'm just going to share my screen again. So through here, and then we can continue on. All right. Sorry about that, everybody. Technical difficulties. All right. Sharing my desktop, and we're good to go. Pete, can I get a thumbs up? All right. Perfect. Thank you very much. All right. So where were we? Yeah, Tim Berners-Lee drove this point home at the opening ceremony of the Olympics, right? Where he said, this is for everyone, right? Regardless of race, religion, color, creed, location, mobile carrier, right? We all have the right to the web. So we have to stop thinking in sort of these myopic ways. Mobile users won't do that is something that we commonly hear. That's absolute horseshit, right? Or elephant shit, or donkey shit, whatever you prefer. Mobile users will do anything and everything desktop users will do, provided it's presented in a usable way. So we can't stop thinking, or we have to stop thinking of the web as this, as the mobile web as the web light, right? How many people are used to seeing something like this? Right? Sorry, that page is not supported on mobile at this time. You know, we don't allow mobile devices on Team Madness. Follow My Health currently requires a desktop browser. A mobile version will be available soon, giving us that false sense of hope, right? The page you're trying to visit is currently available on our full HTML site. Doritos, no galleries, no articles. You're using an unsupported browser even though you're on a very capable Android device. Pizza Hut. This is a really robust, single-page scrolling website, but it says, this site was designed to be viewed on standard desktops, laptops, and tablets only, blah, 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 some long-winded excuse. This website contains media too rich for a mobile web browser. Like, I can't be bothered with you peasant device, right? This is Google, sorry guys, but this is actually for a Google Mobile Web Initiative thing, and it says, alternately, we suggest checking out the site from your tablet if you have one. I'm not really quite sure what you would call that guy right there. That looks like a tablet to me. This is my favorite one though. This page has to be ideally opened on your laptop or desktop browser. Once you open this link on your computer, then you will have a QR code to the URL that needs to be opened on your device. Holy crap. So really what we're talking about here is the one web principle, right? I'm sure we've all heard that. I talk a lot about achieving content parity across devices. The term thematic consistency, which was dubbed by the W3C to talk about, how web experiences can look and function differently, provided that the information is still presentable in some way, shape, or form. But really, what I found to be really beneficial is to talk about it in very common sense language and say, give people what they want. Right? If they click on a link, they have an expectation for something, and it's up to us to provide that expectation and meet that expectation. So if we take a look at Mitt Romney's site, this is actually a previous edition of Mitt Romney's site, you get to see sort of a breakdown of the desktop site in the left and then the mobile site in the right. But if you look at the navigation in the mobile site, you'll see that only a few options, right, out of the desktop site appear on the mobile version of the site. So that's really bad, and it leaves a lot of questions unanswered, right? Like, who is this guy? Like, there's no way to access his biography. Where does he stand on issues? There's no way to access that information. What about his plan for jobs? What can he do for my state? Where could I shop? All of those things were inaccessible from the mobile version of the website. And again, for a lot of people, they might not know to click the view full desktop link, and as a result, they're just going to go elsewhere for their information, which certainly could be biased in some way, shape, or form. So thankfully, they did a redesign that did a lot better. They redesigned the site. The desktop site looks different. The mobile site looks different. And you could see that the menu now contains all of the sections of the desktop site, which is good. In responsive design, it does a lot better job of achieving content parity just because everything exists under one roof. But that doesn't mean that it by default achieves content parity. A lot of times, and a lot of sites do this, will simply hide content from mobile viewers. So the site on the left is a blog, and it says, but hey, that's just my opinion. Feel free to shoot me down in the comments. However, the comments and the comment form are hidden for small screen users, so there's no comments, which obviously is a bad thing. On the right is a navigation with a lot of important sounding links, right? Post a job, about us, our guarantee, contact us. All of that stuff sounds really, really important. But because space is constrained on a small mobile device, they've simply hidden all of the navigation elements for small screens, rendering those things totally inaccessible. So if you look at Barack Obama's redesigned site, really the only thing that I could see that wasn't accessible from small screens was the store. So the desktop version had a store, but the mobile version really had no way to access shopping experience from your phone. Another problem with regards to basic access is URL redirection. And this is something I see a lot of. How many people have seen something like this? Right? You go through, you're clicking on your Twitter feed or your Facebook feed, and somebody shares an m.dot link, and you open it from your desktop browser, right? We see this stuff all the time. Here's Microsoft, here's this, this, right? This is pretty common. And then, of course, we end up at Mitt Romney's website, right? If you're on a mobile device and you share Mitt Romney's website, and someone clicks from that onto a desktop browser, they get this page, which clearly I'm sure the designers never intended for the site to be viewed in this way. This comic really sort of helps sum it up. A lot of the problems of sort of maintaining separate mobile websites, right? And, hi, I'm a server. Who are you? I'm a browser. I'd like to see this article. Oh, I can help. Let me get it for you. Whoa, you're a smartphone browser. Yeah, cool. Well, hey, I got this new mobile version of my site. Check it out. Isn't it pretty? Sure, but you just redirected me to the main page. Where's the article I wanted? What article? Who are you? Hi, I'm a server. So it's really important. URLs are extremely important. And unfortunately, the sort of M dot and tablet dot and all of those other dots become a maintenance nightmare. In addition, coming back to our splash screen issue that I brought up earlier, this continue to the website link for Obama's site, you could click on that all you want from Opera Mini, which is a proxy browser. So all the client-side stuff gets handled by the server. And as a result, you get hit with a splash screen, and you could click on continue to the website all you want, but you can't get past the splash screen. It doesn't redirect you to the proper homepage, which is a really big issue. All of a sudden, Opera Mini, which is a very, very popular browser, especially all over the world, you know, so regions like Africa and Asia Pacific and stuff like that, they have no way of getting to the site if they're using that browser, which is a pretty big deal. So access is absolutely fundamental, right? Without it, you can make the most, you know, beautiful, parallaxy, interactive website you could imagine, but if people can't access it, you know, they clearly can't interact with it, right? So let's talk about the next tier of interaction, which is interaction. Obviously, there is a whole lot of different ways a user can interact with the site, but I'm just going to focus on a couple that I think are pretty important. So let's talk about navigation. This is my friend Quincy, and my friend Quincy is a good friend of mine. And I say good friend because I was able to peruse his entire Facebook photo library, pick the most embarrassing photo of him and post it online and show it to all you people without asking him. So that's how good of a friend Quincy is. So anyways, I recently moved from New York City to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and the day we were supposed to move, or the day before we were supposed to move, my wife got really, really, really sick. And she was supposed to drive the car across and, you know, help pack and all of that stuff. Our friend Quincy went out of his way and said, you know, I could help you guys out. And he took his entire weekend off and drove over with us and helped us move. So yeah, Quincy's a good friend. But the thing is that we don't really see Quincy all that often. We maybe see him once a month or once every other month. So it's a pretty big deal for him to help us out like that. So what does this have to do about navigation? I think that navigation should be like Quincy, right? Where it's there when you need them, but cool enough to give you your space. Whenever a navigation is absent, you know, obviously that's a big deal. But if the nav is always in your face, this is an example of a responsive website. All these different pages, right? These are different pages of the website you can see by the little active state. But the navigation's just in your way, right? You're not able to get to the core content of the website. It becomes that friend that's just always hanging around or always annoying and just sort of asking you what you're up to, you know? Hey, you want to hang out? Hey, you want to hang out? Hey, you want to go to the movies? Hey, you want to go to brunch? Hey, 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 hey. It's annoying, right? So you want navigation to be accessible, but you also want it to be out of the way. So if you look at Obama's navigation, the previous edition of Obama's website utilized the sort of Facebook-like slide out method, right? Wherever if you're on a small screen, it slides out from the left, and whenever space becomes available, it simply stacks the links across the top. So my friend Stephanie Rieger took a look at the navigation and tested it out whenever it first came out. And she found some pretty troubling things. She said, "In the menu failed, never even opened. Suddenly, the site was without navigation at all." she tested on a lot of different devices, right? She found that it only worked on the Galaxy Nexus, which at the time had just come out, and an iPhone 4 with running iOS 5. Where it didn't work, as you can see, is a whole lot of different environments. And so she wrote about this in a post called Plea for Progressive Enhancement. And, I have to say that I totally agree with her. A lot of people think of JavaScript support as being very binary. And people say things like, oh, of course users, don't have their JavaScript turned off anymore. That's very 1998 of you to think that. But whenever you look at instances like this, where, JavaScript has failed in some way, shape, or form, but all of these different devices are actually quite capable from a JavaScript point of view. The idea is just about providing an adequate fallback if things go wrong. This is me testing Obama's site on a BlackBerry, and if you note in the top left corner, that's where the menu button should be, and there's no way of getting to the navigation. It just is entirely invisible or absent. So yeah, see, these are big deals. So thankfully, whenever Obama redesigned his website, they did something a little more clever, utilizing the footer anchor technique, where you basically click a link in the header and it jumps you down to the footer of the website where the navigation lives, and also using the multi-toggle, which is basically just nesting sub-navigation items in little accordions, or sort of nesting them in there like that. So the result of that is something that's a lot more accessible. It works on more devices, and sort of avoids a lot of those problems. If we look at Mitt Romney's website, you can see that, again, this is the earlier version of his website, and we talked about how it doesn't include everything on the website, or on the desktop version of the website, and that's a pretty big deal. But it's also sort of weird that the only navigation exists on the home page, right? The home page is sort of this dashboard, and all the other sub-pages basically just link back to the home page. So there's really no navigation on any sub-pages. So it becomes sort of this full-page redirect in order to navigate to another section of the site. So I wouldn't say that that's very efficient. In addition, you look at things like back buttons, right? And if you look, all browsers have some way of going back in the history. So that sort of back button that you're including there is a bit redundant. So again, if we look at the updated version of Romney's website, we see he's utilizing what's called the toggle, right? Where it basically says open menu, and you tap that, and then it exposes the navigation, and then it says close menu. So again, that's a pretty good way of keeping things accessible yet still unobtrusive. So definitely a step in the right direction for him. Another interaction that doesn't really get talked about a lot is that of scrolling, right? It's a pretty common interaction, obviously, but it's also not terribly sexy to talk about. But what I found is that whenever we scroll on mobile, whether on the web or just anywhere else in apps or whatever, we're typically doing one of three things. We're either going back in time, we're going through a Facebook feed or an email feed, or some form of time-based grouping of items. We're going through grouped items, or we're diving in deep into content. So again, we have things like going back in time. You're scrolling back in time through your posts, through your email, through whatever. Going through groups of items, things like categories of names and stuff like that. So I'm going through my my contact lists on my phone, or I'm going through an artist list, in iTunes or Ardio or something like that. Or I'm diving in deep into a single piece of content, right? I'm reading my email, and this Nigerian prince email looks very attractive to me, so I want to learn more, so I'm going to scroll down. right? Or I'm reading a really great article on the web, and so I'm going to scroll down to read it. So what I found, though, is that we're always scrolling through a singular content type. This is important for responsive design because so much of responsive design is how to, the conversation is about how to reflow layouts. You know, what do we do with those second and third and fourth columns and stuff? And typically the answer is to simply stack them underneath each other. And what I found is that that just doesn't make for a very good user experience. So if you look, again, here's Mitt Romney's site on the left, and here's a previous version of Obama's site on the right. And you can see you have this sort of big call out, this Obama, Clooney, and you have an email sign-up form, you have a couple touts that highlight certain things, you have his record in brief, and then as you scroll down, oh, sorry about that. It doesn't seem to work. But as you scroll down this page, you have all of this stuff, right? You have the record in brief, then you get down to his blog post, and you see the blog post, and you see all these share icons for each blog post, and it goes through about 10 different blog posts. And then underneath, there's a bunch of things like his tweets, and then underneath that, it's like take action, and then underneath that, it's even more stuff. And then eventually you get down to the footer, where it just contains this huge spray of links. And the idea is that you're simply sifting through all of this disparate content just to find what you're looking for. It's not a very good user experience. Again, like the user expectation on a mobile device is to scroll through a single content type. And by simply stacking things on top of each other, users are forced to go on a treasure hunt just to find what they're looking for. So we want to avoid that. And if we look at Obama's redesigned website, they've done some sort of clever optimization where basically on small screens, they just expose the title of their blog posts instead of showing the full excerpts and all these images and all these share buttons, in addition to them. So that creates a more scannable experience, a better performing experience, and all of that stuff. So definitely a step in the right direction. Conditional loading is sort of what we're talking about with regards to how to solve those problems, right? How do we include a full experience, especially for larger screens, but still sort of keep things nice and compact and fast loading right out of the gate for small mobile screens. Scott Gell calls this aggressive enhancement. I really love that term. I hope it catches on. But basically the idea is this. We have a web page. Could be any web page. We have the thing. And the thing is the thing that's defined by the URI, right? If you click on a picture that says, click here for cute kittens, whenever you click on that link, what do you expect to find? You expect to find cute kittens. But in addition to those pictures of cute kittens, there's all this other stuff, right? We might have related pictures of cute kittens. We might have a comment form. We might have social icons to share the thing. But all of those things aren't the pictures of cute kittens themselves, right? So what we could do is we could actually chunk those things out, those sort of supplemental or any-sessional bits, which actually, again, they might not all be crap. It's not like you could just remove them entirely, but we could just be a little more thoughtful of how we introduce them into the experience. So what we could do is we could simply chunk those out, link to them from the main page, so link to the comments, and have them isolated. So again, if JavaScript fails or when it fails, the user can click here to view comments, and they tap that, and then they get taken to a new screen that shows the comments. So again, the idea is to create an accessible experience, but then from there, we could sort of pull everything together like Voltron when the conditions are right? Whenever the screen's large enough to accommodate those extra chunks, or whenever the user requests them, we could sort of just pull everything all together. I think that that's a really, really valuable technique that we have at our disposal to sort of help keep the core experience really, really light, but also not sort of sacrifice, serving up an eventual robust web experience. So the next thing we're going to talk about is performance. Performance is, in my opinion, very neglected. And the expectations are high, right? Mobile users expect mobile sites to load as fast, if not faster, than desktop sites. And that's a pretty huge majority there, 71%. And a full 74% of mobile visitors will abandon a site if it takes more than 5 seconds to load. And that's a huge number, a full 3/4. So in other words, really you have 5 seconds of someone's time, right? And if you don't give them something in that 5 seconds, they're gone. And they'll oftentimes go to a competitor's site and they will be gone and never come back. But the problem is that the average page size just keeps growing and keeps growing, more obese every single day. Why is this happening? What I found is that, just performance is invisible. It's this sort of invisible aspect of design, right? You can't mock up performance in Photoshop, right? You can't sort of just put it there as a line item on your thing, performance. It's simply, it's often this thing that's just, it's always there, but it's always neglected. So because of that, I've been talking about elevating performance as a design feature rather than as something that only developers need to worry about. Because very often, and this will probably sound familiar to you, performance is usually one of the sort of lesser concerns, right? Deadline's getting closer, we don't really have a whole lot of time. It's like, oh yeah, we'll just worry about all those performance optimizations later. Don't worry about it. We just need to get the site launched, and that's just something that the developers need to take care of. If the site's slow, it's the developer's fault. It's not the fact that they've designed 30 meg images and included a bunch of crazy parallax stuff, right? So I've been talking about performance as design. We need to elevate it earlier in the design process. So we can't just leave it at the end of the process. If you don't think that performance is important, it's important to understand that performance is good design. Good performance is good design. If you don't believe me, just look at the whole Facebook thing, right? I had a lot of people, whenever I mentioned that I work in mobile, people would say, Facebook sucks, as if it was my fault or something. But they weren't saying that Facebook sucks because the navigation was unintuitive, or that the timeline redesign wasn't elegant, or that the navigation wasn't cool. They were saying it sucks because it was just so slow, right? So we really need to prioritize performance in this day and age. We can't just sort of cross our fingers and hope that 4G and LTE and everyone's just going to be rocking a Fios connection anytime soon. We really can't bank on that. We need to address the constraints of bandwidth. So if we look at how the candidates fared, this is a typical web page on Romney's site, right, the Pennsylvania page. And I ran it through a tool which at the time was called Blaze.io. It's since been renamed, and we'll get to that in a minute. And what I found is that the mobile site took 8.75 seconds to load and weighed 687K, which is actually pretty decent. It's still above that 5-second mark that we'd like to see, but at the same time, the file size is significantly lighter than the average page weight. Then we get over to the responsive end of things, right? Guy Pajerny, who helped make Blaze.io, which is now Mobi Test, now works at Akamai, found that 86% of responsive websites serve the same payload, or roughly the same payload, to small screen viewers as large screen viewers. So in other words, all these mobile sites are basically getting a desktop heavy experience. And so that's definitely reflected in Barack Obama's website. This is again a previous edition of it, and we ran it through the same test and found that it takes 21.68 seconds to load and weighed 3.5 megs, which is gigantic, right? And that actually creates some serious accessibility issues. My cousin, who's a geologist, has a company-issued BlackBerry, and I asked him to fire up Obama's website on his BlackBerry, and this is what he sent back to me. It said, "Request entity too large." In other words, it's saying, I'm not even going to try to render that page. It's just way too big. And it's funny to point out that Obama actually has a BlackBerry. So I was sort of curious to see if Obama could access his own website from his phone. Hopefully he can. But if you look at the waterfall charts, on the left is Mitt Romney, on the right is Obama. You can just clearly see that Obama's site is loading way more stuff, right? If we look at, so they both underwent through the course of the campaign, they both underwent some pretty serious redesigns. So I ran both of the redesigns through the updated tool, which is again called Mobi Test by Akamai. And it basically fires up, you could paste in any URL, it will fire it up on a real device and then spit back the performance stats for it. So how long it takes to load, what the page size is, and all the waterfall charts, and even provide some screenshots and stuff. It's a great tool. So I ran Mitt Romney's website through this tool and found that it actually now takes 19.58 seconds to load, and now their mobile site weighs 1.6 megs, which is giant, right? Once upon a time, it was sitting around like 8 seconds to load in 687K, and now it's huge and it's bloated. Now, granted, you know, they are achieving content parity a lot more, but it is a serious step backwards for them as far as performance goes. And if we look at Obama's website, their redesign actually came down quite a bit in file size. It used to be 3.5 megs, and they cut it down to a meg. It's still on the heavier side of things, and it still takes 18.76 seconds to load, but at the same time, you know, that's a pretty big step in the right direction. So performance is absolutely essential. I think that we need to sort of elevate its status. We need to treat it as more of an urgent matter, treat it as a design problem rather than a development problem. I think that does a lot of good as far as getting more people on board. You know, just include that in your statements of work and in your project briefs and stuff. You know, to say the goal is to create a, you know, really fast website that's very flexible, yada, yada, yada. So the last little bit of the pyramid is this concept of enhancement, right? Progressive enhancement is your friend. Just because we have more limited devices or legacy browsers or whatever doesn't mean that we can't capitalize on all the new and great features that are coming down the pipes really fast and furious. Right? But in order to do this, we need to build up from a core experience. We need to embrace the constraints first, address those constraints first, and build up. You know, you hear the term mobile first a lot, and really from this, from a development standpoint, it's about sort of addressing the constraints of the mobile medium, right? Low bandwidth, you know, small resolutions, potentially inferior feature sets and stuff like that. And really just sort of build up those experiences so that as devices you know, have more screen real estate, as devices have more capabilities, we're in a position where we could simply add on to a core experience in order to capitalize on those features, instead of sort of assuming things by default. Oh, of course users are on a large screen, or of course users support touch, or of course users whatever. All of a sudden you have to cross your fingers and hope that nobody releases a popular device that doesn't meet those criteria. So it's really, really important to progressively enhance experiences now more than ever. And really what I say is that this is foundational work. Jeremy Keith wonderfully stated, he said, you know, starting with the lowest common denominator, or progressive enhancement doesn't mean designing for the lowest common denominator. It means starting there. You know, I think that there's a misconception that if you want to do anything advanced or whatever, you have to ignore progressive enhancement. That's simply not the case. It's just a matter of laying a solid foundation and covering your bases and then building up from there. Again, we have tools like Modernizer that gives us all sorts of different things that we could detect, right, and capitalize on them, introduce more advanced functionality if a device supports geolocation, if the device supports app cache or WebSockets or whatever. We actually have these tools on the server side. This is Detector by Dave Olson, which actually, you know, is a sort of a combination user agent / feature detection tool that all gets handled on the server end of things. So again, you know, it doesn't all need to be client side when we're doing this adaptation, but the idea is to really capitalize on the specific device that's accessing your experience. And it's also important to understand that different users have different expectations, right? My cousin's BlackBerry, he's not expecting this crazy multi-touch CSS3 transition web experience. He's really, you know, just trying to access some information and read some things and maybe fill out a form or two or whatever. But he understands that he doesn't have the latest and greatest Android device, the latest and greatest iPhone. Whenever you make these stupid assumptions, you start looking silly, right? Fatal error, no iPhone, iPad, HTML5 images available. I honestly don't really know what that means, but yeah, you know, you're depriving people an experience arbitrarily is what's going on here. And it's also important to understand that there's a difference between support and optimization. Unless you wanted to hole yourself up in a cabin for the foreseeable future with a bunch of different devices, there's no way you're going to be able to optimize for every single platform and configuration and user preference and setting out there. So you need to draw a line between what you support and what you optimize for. And it's important to understand that difference. Just because I think a lot of people use, they sort of misconstrue what optimization or what support means. And they say, well, we only want to support, you know, WebKit browsers, or we only want to support the iPhone, and everything else can take a hike. There's still a way to optimize for iPhone. There's still a way to optimize for you know, the best of breed and most capable devices, while still providing some level of support for those other users. Just because, you know, you don't like their configuration or whatever, or it's a pain in the ass to develop for, doesn't mean we have the right to arbitrarily lock them out of an experience. So there's a lot of different things that we could enhance, right? This is the candidate's website. You have all these opportunities to utilize things like the right input types for forms, right? So here we have a zip code on both Mitt Romney's site and Obama's site. And what they could do is define these things as numeric inputs that allow, that pull up the right virtual keyboard on touch devices, right? That makes the form a little easier to load, or to get through. Here we have the newsletter site on Obama's site, and you're looking at the email field will actually pull up. So they did that one right. So they did input type equals email, and it pulls up the little @ sign. It gets rid of you know, these other unnecessary characters. So it makes it a little more easy to do. But then you go down into the zip field, and that should be a numeric value, and it's not. So there's a lot of different things that we could do. One of which is, you know, again, changing the input type to number, which is great, but then also adding this pattern attribute to the string, which basically pulls up the bigger, chunkier telephone prompt. So, instead of just having the numbers 1 through 10 across the top, like the previous screen, oh wait, sorry, I don't have an example of that. You instead get these big, huge, chunky keys, which is fantastic. Another optimization that's really important to understand is that these telephones in which we're accessing the web can make telephone calls. And Obama's website is actually using this to his advantage. So they have this call tool where people are able to make calls on the candidate's behalf and say, hey, are you voting? Are you registered to vote? Who are you voting for? And give their whole spiel. Basically, from an old school standpoint, you would have to look at the screen and then dial a phone number on another device, right? Which is hugely cumbersome, takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of room for error. But again, these mobile devices can make phone calls right from the device. So the user can be on Obama's website, simply tap that number and initiate a phone call. That's really, really clever. Other things, for the candidates, like geolocation is really, really important. Things that battleground states and location matters a great deal. But there's, ultimately just all sorts of things that we can enhance. Again, if we look at that list from Modernizer, it's a pretty extensive list, and this is just the beginning. So, wrapping up, this is what I want you to get out of this, is that users don't give a shit if your site is responsive. They don't give a shit if it's a separate mobile site. They do give a shit when they can't get done what they need to get done. Right? Whenever they can't accomplish their tasks is when they start noticing what environment they're in. There's all of these different things that we need to take into mind whenever we're creating these multi-device web experiences, and it's just important to focus on the right aspects of the process. And it's important to understand, I took a lot of shots at the candidates' websites and on other sites and stuff as well. But this stuff is really, really hard. We're all trying to figure this out. It's important to start somewhere, right? You might have a current desktop site that's big and clunky and crusty and old, but it's just out of the question to do a full-blown redesign. So these separate mobile sites, while they might be sort of short-sighted in the near term, can be a tremendous opportunity to help you sort of evolve out from under your old legacy desktop site. So while a mobile site might be initially limited as far as its content goes, as far as its functionality goes and stuff like that, you can still plant the seed for a responsive future. And that's exactly what a lot of organizations are doing. And eventually you put time, you put effort into it, and ultimately you could sort of evolve out of your old crusty desktop site and into this new global site that's mobile first built, it's adaptive, it's future friendly. That's exactly what organizations like the BBC are doing, like People Magazine are doing, and stuff like that. It just doesn't make sense for them to strip away their old desktop site just yet. But at the same time, they're learning how to deal with diversity. They're learning all the quirks and the tricks of the trade with regards to the mobile web. So the takeaway from that is to just start somewhere. Even if you don't fundamentally agree with creating separate mobile sites, that's okay. As long as you're planning on sort of treating it as a stepping stone for future enhancements. And again, this stuff is really, really hard, and there's a lot to learn from a lot of different people. So it's really important to not get hung up in specific implementations and techniques. I think that we need to sort of stand together on principles that we could all agree on. We all believe in the web. I like to say, this ain't religion, this is web design. So, be willing to abandon a best practice that you've been using your whole career whenever you find evidence that it makes sense to abandon. I really like this quote from Benjamin Franklin. He says, "Whenever you're finished changing, you're finished. And that means, you know, we can't get hung up in our ways. We can't, you know, get religious about certain techniques and say this is the one right way to do things. We need to constantly be evolving. If you think of all the different devices that are coming out just in the last couple months, we need to be evolving right there with them. You know, because the minute we don't, you know, the minute we put the web at risk. And let's face it, this is going to be really, really fun. You know, I can't think of a better problem to help solve than, you know, determining who the web can reach, what it can do, where it can go, how it gets used, and why it still matters. I think that that's a tremendous problem to have and just a really, really fun problem to help solve. So with that, I would like to say I kept politics out of this, but I did cast my vote for the candidate that I thought had the best website, and that is why I voted for Jimmy McMillan's The Rent is Too Damn High party. Its ample use of Comic Sans and loud borders and animated GIFs, it won me over, so I had to vote for him. So, you know, I might have to change that to 2016, but I hope him and his awesome website is in our future. So thanks very much, guys, for listening. Sorry for the technical difficulties, and hopefully we could take a look at some questions now.
Yeah, absolutely. So Brad, if you want to come off screen sharing, and I'll bring us up so that they can see us both. So one of the first questions that we have that's got a lot of votes, when creating a responsive site, is it the best practice to define media queries in pixels or EMs? And are there pros and cons to consider when using each of those?
Yeah, so there's definitely advantages to defining your media queries in relative units like EMs. Liza Danger Gardner of Cloud4 wrote about this, about basically how proportional media queries are a lot more future friendly, but also present friendly. So in my experience, I've seen pixel width sort of destroyed. So a lot of different devices handle pixels in a lot of different ways. 16 pixels on a certain device might look totally different than 16 pixels elsewhere.
Yep.
But also user zoom settings are really important. So if I go into a responsive website and command plus magnify the site, which I like to do actually, if your media queries are set in pixels, it won't honor the user zoom settings. But if you handle them with relative units using EMs, it will honor them. I think it requires a page refresh, but at the same time, it will reflow the layout appropriately if you use proportional media queries. And the other thing that's worth stating is that we're using proportional units for everything else now, right?
Yeah, that's true.
For layouts, for fonts, for everything now. Just take it that one step further and define your breakpoints in relative units.
Yeah. All right, cool. So next question from Dan in Amsterdam wants to know, should we take into account a device bandwidth before serving content, especially media assets to the device? If so, how should we implement that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of actually really recent things that have been coming up regarding sort of bandwidth. It's still really tricky to detect bandwidth. We have sort of the navigator connection type and stuff like that, but even that's not reliable. Anybody that's been on like hotel Wi-Fi will probably know that 3G is oftentimes faster than that. So we can't make assumptions even based on even knowing what kind of connection type we have. So I'd say that it's best to assume a slow, painfully slow connection by default, and serve up assets appropriately. Things like adaptive images, and there's a lot of different solutions and stuff that's sort of coming down the pipes with regards to the spec and stuff like that. But in the meantime, we have tools like Picture Fill, which allows us to serve a small image by default, but then whenever you reach a certain breakpoint or whatever, then load in a larger image asset. Same thing with Retina graphics and stuff like that. Small by default, but then conditionally load in a higher res version. But one of the most recent things that has been pretty clever is that they're finding that the image compression, like JPEG compression, is more a factor in determining a device's bandwidth, or an image's size, than the dimensions of them. So everyone's freaking out about Retina screens and stuff like that now, and it's important to understand that you could actually create larger images with larger dimensions, but a lower compression rate, and then just simply scale them down, and they'll look great on Retina displays as well as just standard displays. And in some cases, the file size of the enhanced, the bigger
is even smaller.
Image is even smaller than the base image, which is pretty crazy. So, but yeah, image optimization, other things like maps and other interactive components, just don't include those things by default. And again, I was talking about conditionally loading. I will give my little example. I have a demo of this on the way. Hopefully I can share it later on, of something like Google Maps, right? If you want to embed Google Maps in your site, you have to iframe in the embedded map. But for small screens, I would actually argue that's not a very good experience. For one, a lot of major smartphone platforms like iOS and Android will intercept links to Google Maps and fire up the native mapping application, which is a far better user experience than anything on the web can provide. Again, it just has access to more things. So I'd say that that's the best experience. So the demo that I have simply includes a link to Google Maps, and you could use the Google Static Map API or whatever to pull in a still or whatever, if you want to. And then whenever the screen size becomes big enough, then you can load in that iframe, that embeddable map and stuff like that. So again, it's about sort of serving the right experience to the right context and stuff. But by assuming less up front, you're not forcing mobile users to download all this JavaScript to render an iframe by default. And as a result, you're able to just sort of take bandwidth into consideration. At the very least, if everything fails, they have a link to Google Maps, and I'd trust Google's developers on the Maps mobile team more than me to make sure that people can get to where they need to get.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, Brad, I think that's about all the time that we have for today. I want to say thank you so much for joining us. This was enlightening. This is the second time I've seen this session, and I learned stuff again this second time. So I want to say thank you very much. I want to invite all of our viewers to join us in 3 weeks on December 5th. We're going to have another Chrome mobile event where we'll be talking about some of the tools that you can use as a developer building mobile sites, mobile applications. So with that, thank you guys very much. Brad, thank you. And
cool, thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, have a good day, everybody.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.